of the former president. They're not his personal documents, but they are his documents as his former position of President of the United States. So they can assert confidentiality. They can ask a sitting president to assert executive privilege. The President of the United States today, Donald Trump, has asserted privilege over a bunch of those documents in recognition of separation of powers between the branches of government, that those documents do not belong to Congress, that a president must be able to receive the kind of advice that I'm talking about. It doesn't affect Trump, future presidents and so forth, and past presidents have always operated this way. So the Democrats again are trying to break with norms. The Democrats again are trying to violate traditions and customs that have been in existence for I don't know how long. And you'll hear them go on and on and on. Hey, we asked for 100,000 documents, we didn't get them. Or we asked for this, and we didn't get them. And we didn't have time to read this and time to read that. And what Grassley has said over and over and over again, and he's done a pretty damn good job, is look, if you have a question about one of these documents, the Presidential Library, the archives of Bush, they've given us a bunch of these documents to review confidentially in executive session as members, but not publicly. So they've met them more than halfway. And Grassley has said, if there's a particular document that you want made public, bring it up to us. We will talk to the archives. We will talk to whomever we need to talk to, and we'll consider it. But they won't do it. They've done it in a very few circumstances. They keep demanding that all these documents be made public, or that they receive all the documents that the archives and the library and others have decided to hold back. As if there's a smoking gun. There's no smoking gun. This is Brett Kavanaugh, not Ted Kennedy, who's up for the Supreme Court. Anyway, that gives you a little bit of context. Go ahead.
I move to adjourn. I ask for a roll call vote.
We're not in executive session. We will continue as planned.
Mr. Chairman, may I be recognized, sir?
Cory Booker is asked to be recognized. And in the 3 days of hearings so far, Cory Booker gets the biggest jackass award of the bunch. And there's a bunch of them there. He is unbelievable in his quest to be noticed by the public, by the hard left, to run for President of the United States. And today he took a step that I don't believe has ever been taken by a senator in the United States Senate, and I'll get to that in a minute too. Go ahead.
Chairman, I appeal to the chair to recognize myself or one of my colleagues.
You're out of order.
Mr. Chairman, I appeal to be recognized on your sense of decency and integrity.
So that's on his sense of decency and integrity. And then as you'll see in a moment, Booker has very little of that. Go ahead.
Documents you have requested, Mr. Chairman, even the ones that you said, the limited documents you have requested, this committee has not received. And the documents we have, you, sir, have labeled committee confidential. They should be transparent. This committee, sir, is a violation of even the values I've heard you talk about time and time again. The ideals that we should have. What is the rush? What are we trying to hide by not having the documents out front? What is the rush? What are we hiding by not letting those documents?
These are people who've been in the Senate a couple of years, who don't give a damn about the Senate. Let's just be honest. They don't give a damn about the Senate. Yeah, that's enough of Booker. They're just turning the tables over. And again, for the third or fourth time, this is what they accuse Trump of. Trump doesn't conduct himself this way. When Trump is under attack, he responds in kind. And he's under attack all the time. Every single day, 10 times a day. They're trying to wear us out. They're trying to wear out the American people so we get sick of it and say, all right, the hell with Trump. Let's get somebody else in there. They're trying to wear us down with their static, with their pounding, with their noise, with the pots and pans and all the rest. But look at this. This should be getting the kind of attention that it deserves. Not because it's good, not because you'll learn anything, but because of the opposite. And the idea that the Democrats are ready to lead the country. You think these people are ready to lead the country? They're pathetic. They're disgusting. They know exactly what they're doing. Now, what's going on here? They've asked Kavanaugh, when they finally get the questions, whether a president can pardon himself. Or Leahy asks, can a president pardon somebody as part of a deal in exchange for that person not testifying against him? First of all, obviously Kavanaugh cannot answer that. But it is an outrageous number of questions. They don't want Kavanaugh to say if it was intellectually honest, say, yes, the president can pardon himself. There's nothing in the Constitution that says otherwise. Well, what about a subpoena? Must a president answer to a subpoena? He says, I can't answer that. That could be an issue that I confront, on the Supreme Court. As a matter of fact, I'm still a judge on the circuit court in D.C. That could very well come up, and I have to address it there. So they're using it again, just like the McCain Infinite Memorial. They're using it again as just another occasion to attack the president. Nothing's holy anymore. Nothing. Nothing's holy anymore. Nothing is out of touch anymore. Anything can be politicized and trashed as long as it comes to Trump. It's just unbelievable. And Cory Booker today reportedly released confidential pages of documents that the committee had not agreed to release, documents that didn't belong to the committee, that belonged to the Bush Library and the archives, and on his own, unilaterally, he released it. Then the other Democrats on the committee supported his position, of course. Then he was called out by Senator John Cornyn, a former Supreme Court justice in Texas, and said that violated a rule of the United States Senate that could result in penalties up to and including expulsion. And Cory Booker says, bring it on, bring it on. He says this is his Spartacus moment. Are you kidding me? Spartacus moment in the Senate Judiciary Committee. This is your jackass moment, and you're proving it each and every day. So here we have Cory Booker, who's clearly violated a rule of the United States Senate, who has revealed information he's not free to reveal, not classified, but confidential, a separation of powers issue, and when the rule is read to him by John Cornyn, he says, bring it on. And the other Democrats on the committee support him. And they attack Trump for turning over tables. Pretty damn incredible, isn't it? What else has been going on here? Roe versus Wade. This is their holy grail, abortion. Abortion at any cost, abortion on demand, partial birth abortion. They've not been effectively confronted by the Republicans, which they should be. But my God, can you imagine an ideology and a party that's built around aborting babies? Aborting babies, it's almost a throwaway line. And Dianne Feinstein the other day, yesterday in fact, said that before Roe versus Wade, 125,000 to 1.2 million, some outrageous figures like this, women died as a result of back alley type abortion. So outrageous. The study she cited said 300 to 400 in a year or two prior to Roe versus Wade. And they don't mean back alley per se, but they mean quote unquote illegal abortions. And even that is questioned by scholars and so forth. So they throw these things around. It's the party of abortion, abortion, abortion. Can you imagine being a party like that? You hear these protesters. There's a video out there, I can't confirm its accuracy, but others seem to, of people being paid to protest. They're being paid to protest. They come in, 700 people so far have been arrested. Have you ever seen anything like this? I haven't. And then last weekend, Tom Tillis, the senator from North Carolina, confronted the Democrats at the first hearing, and he said, look, it's my understanding that you all had a phone conference on the weekend, that is last weekend before the Monday hearings began, Tuesday hearings began, Monday was Labor Day, and he said, so this is a strategy, and Durbin admitted it. This is a strategy. It's all planned, it's all plot, it's all theater, it's all for TV, it's all for the radical COUP base. That's what's become of the Supreme Court hearing process. So much craziness going on. So now we have an op-ed, you've heard about this from 1,000 people, in the New York Times. I am part of the resistance inside the Trump administration. The author is anonymous. I don't believe the New York Times has done this before, but what is this? You know, people are focusing on whomever it is who wrote this. And the New York Times says it's a he, which means it's a she, by the way. They do everything they can to cover these people. And whenever you see somebody in an administration getting positive coverage from the New York Times or the Washington Post, or almost no coverage, that often means, not necessarily in every case, but it often means they're leakers because they protect their sources. This is how I knew a long time ago that the top echelon of the FBI, remember guys, how I said, were leaking, where they were leaking on Trump. How did I know? They either got accolades from the media or you never heard of them. They're not the target of the attacks by the media. They're protected by the media because they have something in common. So the New York Times, which is, I'll say, every damn time, which all but denied the Holocaust in the middle of the Holocaust, it's the paper of record. And so now we're supposed to believe the New York Times, and we have an anonymous person who wrote an opinion for the New York Times. So what does it say about the New York Times that they run something like this, trashing Trump the same week that this book, Fear, by Woodward, is being pushed? I'll get to him in a minute, too. We got a lot to do. I'm going to do it all in the next 15 or 20 minutes. So let's go through this a little bit. President Trump, goes the op-ed, is facing a test to his presidency unlike any faced by a modern American leader. It's not just that the special counsel looms large or that the country is bitterly divided over Mr. Trump's leadership, or even that his party might well lose the House to an opposition hell-bent on his downfall. This is an insider. The dilemma, which he does not fully grasp, is that many of the senior officials in his own administration are working diligently from within to frustrate parts of his agenda and worse inclinations. I would know, I'm one of them. Now let's just stop there. How many times have I told you there's a silent coup going on in this country? And it is, and it's coalescing. The Democrats in Congress, the Democrats in the media, the Democrats in the intelligence agency, the Democrats in law enforcement, and the never-Trumpers. That's who this is, who's working in the Trump administration. To be clear, ours is not the popular resistance of the left. We want the administration to succeed and think that many of its policies have already made America safer and more prosperous. But we believe our first duty is to this country, and the president continues to act in a manner that is detrimental to the health of our republic. That is why many Trump appointees have vowed to do what we can to preserve our democratic institutions while thwarting Mr. Trump's most misguided impulses until he's out of office. Can you imagine the New York Times allowing somebody in the Obama administration to write something like this? To say, you know what? Obama's out of control. He's ruling by presidential fiat when it comes to DACA. When it comes to the Iran deal, he's circumvented the treaty clause of the Constitution. When it comes to packing the D.C. Circuit. When it comes to unleashing the IRS. When it comes to, so many issues. Can you imagine the New York Times running an op-ed by an anonymous senior Obama official saying, hey, look, there's a bunch of us trying to thwart this president? What do you think they'd do? They'd be running headlines on their front pages about a coup from within the Obama administration. It's because the New York Times isn't practicing freedom of the press. The New York Times is practicing yellow journalism. It is the golden age of yellow journalism. And it goes on. We believe our first duty is to this country. The root of the problem is the president's amorality. Anyone who works with him knows he's not moored to any discernible first principles that guide his decision-making. Although he was elected as a Republican, the president shows little affinity for ideals long espoused by conservatives: free minds, free markets, and free people. At best, he has invoked those ideals in scripted settings. At worst, he has attacked them outright. I worked for President Ronald Reagan. There were people within his administration, including within the White House, who fought with each other. Some who denigrated the President of the United States. Some who mocked him. Some who disagreed with his policies. They could have written something like this. It would have been just as outrageous, but they could have written something like this. I don't know how many of you work in large organizations where people think very little of the CEO or the manager who is in charge of a particular office and that sort of thing. They could write something like this. The problem is the people who write like this, they're the miscreants. They're the disgruntled ones. They're the malcontents trying to undermine the organization. And that's exactly what's going on here. Sabotage is the right word. In addition to his mass marketing of the notion that the press is the enemy of the people, President Trump's impulses are generally anti-trade and anti-democratic. Now, I do not agree with this president wholly on trade, but that's not a reason to write something like this. And how are his impulses undemocratic? What has he done? Name one thing he's done to undermine our constitutional system. Name one statute he hasn't complied with. One court order he hasn't complied with. What, do you think he's Franklin Roosevelt? No. Don't get me wrong, so-and-so writes. There are bright spots that the near ceaseless negative coverage of the administration fails to capture. Effective deregulation, historic tax reform, a more robust military, and more. But these successes have come despite, not because of the president's leadership style, which is impetuous, adversarial, petty, and ineffective. So the president gets no credit for the successes. No credit whatsoever. That's thanks to his staff, don't you know? Now, doesn't that tell you there's something sick going on with somebody in there? And it ain't the president. From the White House to executive branch departments and agencies, senior officials will privately admit their daily disbelief at the commander-in-chief's comments and actions. Most are working to insulate their operations from his whims. Meetings with... How would this person know this? Do you know that in an administration, typically, there are 2,000 to 3,000, typically over 3,000 political appointees? This administration has fewer than most, to my chagrin. That's a lot of political appointees. Now, in the context of the government, with over 2 million bureaucrats, it's not. But that's a lot of people who can be making claims that we are working together. You know, there could be a little cabal in some department, a little cabal in some office of the White House. I don't know. But such contempt and disloyalty and disregard for the American people who voted this man constitutionally into office. Who are these people who think that they should rule? Are they not the tyrants? Are they not the despots? Are they not the saboteurs? Are they not the people leading the coup d'etat? Yes, they are. There is literally no telling whether he might change his mind from one to the next. A top official complained to me recently, exasperated by an Oval Office meeting at which the president flip-flopped on a major policy decision he'd made a week earlier. Presidents change their minds on major policy decisions all the time, one week to the next. They may get new information, they may rethink what's taking place, something else might occur. That's an outrageous point. The erratic behavior would be more concerning if it weren't for unsung heroes in and around the White House. You know what this sounds like to me? A deep throat. That at some point, this person, a she, I have no doubt, but this person will write a book. That this is self-serving. They will self-identify when the administration's over or when they're caught and they get the boot. And they'll say, yes, it was me. And they will be celebrated. The media will carry this person, probably a lady, on their shoulders, the way they carried McCain on their shoulders because of his various votes undermining the conservative causes in the Republican Party and so forth. It may be cold comfort in this chaotic era, but Americans should know that there are adults in the room. We fully recognize what's happening, and we are trying to do what's right, even when Donald Trump wrote, what? The result is a two-track presidency. Take foreign policy, in public and in private. President Trump shows a preference for autocrats and dictators. This is why I think it's a woman, and I think it's a woman in the foreign policy realm. Because that seems to be the focus. He shows a preference for autocrats and dictators like Putin and Un, and displays little genuine appreciation for the ties that bind us to allied, like-minded nations. Astute observers had noted, though, that the rest of the administration is operating on another track, one where countries like Russia are called out for meddling and punished accordingly, and where allies around the world are engaged as peers rather than ridiculed as rivals. On Russia, for instance, the president was reluctant to expel so many of Putin's spies as punishment for the poisoning of a former Russian spy in Britain. He complained for weeks about senior staff members letting him get boxed into further confrontation with Russia. And he expressed frustration that the United States continued to impose sanctions on the country for its malign behavior. But his national security team knew better. Ooh. What do you think, guys? Interesting, isn't it? His national security team knew better. Such actions had to be taken to hold Moscow accountable. This isn't the work of the so-called deep state, it's the work of the steady state. And he goes on. Talks about the 25th Amendment. which of course the writer knows not a damn thing about. This I've never seen. Subterfuge. The American people across the board should be concerned, but we know half of them won't be. Half of them don't even know there's 3 branches of government. Half of them don't even know the name of a single member on the Supreme Court. Half of them don't give a damn as long as they get a freebie or as long as they win politically. It's a pretty sad state. Then we have the Washington Post, excuse me. They had to jump in, of course, by Phil Rucker, Ashley Parker, Josh Dawsey, 3 reporters. 3 too many. Senior officials in the Trump administration have been working from within to frustrate parts of the president's agenda. Now think about that. To protect the country from his worst inclinations. President Trump and his aides reacted with indignation Wednesday to an unsigned opinion column from a senior official blasting the president's amorality and launched a frantic hunt for the author. Well, shouldn't you? If somebody was like this in any work environment, let alone the Oval Office, you've got a spy. You've got an infidel. It's not that everyone has to agree. You have somebody who is in there who's actually saying that they are thwarting the President of the United States. And they claim to be in a senior enough position to know what's going on. The extraordinary column published anonymously in the New York Times surfaced one day after the first excerpts emerged from Bob Woodward's new book. And it goes on. You know Bob Woodward, remember him? Bill Casey was a great man, great man. World War II, he was involved in founding the nation's top intelligence apparatus. He would later become head of the CIA. He was chairman of the Reagan campaign for a while. And he was on his deathbed, and Bob Woodward claimed to have gone into his hospital room without anybody noticing and taking notes of conversations he'd had with him. But there's a problem. Mrs. Casey, now deceased, she said that never happened. He wrote a whole damn book on it. Now, in his book, Fury, they talk about what Mattis said. Mattis, who was a 4-star general retired, said, I never said that stuff. Stuff that Kelly said. Kelly, who's a retired 4-star general, said, I never said that stuff. Pompeo, I never said that stuff. And it goes on like that. So who are you going to believe? 2 4-star generals? Or Bob Woodward? Obtained by, they gave him to the Washington Post. The publisher did, the publicist. Go ahead.
Calling it crazy town, at times paralyzed by the Russia investigation and that possible interview with Robert Mueller.
I've always wanted to do an interview.
Woodward describing the president's one-time lead attorney, John Dowd, so convinced the president would commit perjury, he staged a practice interview last January.
Dowd denies that he was convinced the president would commit perjury. It's a perjury trap, Madam Reporter. That's what we're talking about. Go ahead.
That session so rocky, Woodward reports Mr. Dowd later told Mr. Trump, don't testify. It's either that or an orange jumpsuit. The book also a remarkable portrait of aides taking extreme measures to block their boss. Former economic advisor Gary Cohn reportedly preventing the president from withdrawing from a trade agreement with South Korea by swiping a letter off his desk.
Now think about that, if it's true. And I don't believe this guy Cohen, who since has scooted, has denied it. But let's say it's true. Let's play along. If the president wanted to withdraw from a trade agreement with South Korea, which I might disagree, but it doesn't matter. He's the president. The idea that an economic advisor, by the way, worked for Goldman Sachs and is a liberal Democrat, but whatever, would take the paper off the president's desk so he couldn't sign it is outrageous. That's what's outrageous. Go.
And after the president told Defense Secretary James Mattis he wanted to assassinate Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad for a chemical attack on civilians, Mattis reportedly told the president on the phone he would do it, but then telling a senior aide, quote, we're not going to do any of that.
President and Mattis say that never happened. Go ahead.
Describing extraordinary insults from the president's staff. Woodward writing Mattis has described Mr. Trump as having the understanding of a 5th or 6th grader.
He denies that. Go ahead.
And Chief of Staff John Kelly has called the president an idiot.
He denies it. Go ahead.
first reported by NBC News. Tonight, Kelly calling that accusation BS and another pathetic attempt to smear people close to President Trump and distract from the administration's many successes. Mattis calling the accusations the product of someone's rich imagination. Woodward also describing a president lobbing his own insults, calling Attorney General Jeff Sessions a traitor, mentally retarded, and a dumb Southerner. Woodward didn't talk to President Trump for the book, saying his request went unanswered.
All right, that's enough. So Rudy Giuliani says something that's right. He says, okay, Woodward, release all your tapes. You recorded all these conversations, but Woodward's sources are all anonymous. Well, release your tapes, Rudy says. But he won't release his tapes. He only released his conversation with Trump, where Trump refused to cooperate with him. Release your tapes. Why not? I mean, Michael Cohen had to release his, and those actually had a privilege of sorts. You don't have any privilege, do you? Release your tapes. Transparency. Now, you won't hear the media doing that, will you? No. Now, let's talk very briefly about Mr. Woodward. Great piece in Investor's Business Really. They have an excellent editorial page there. The mainstream press is rushing to defend Bob Woodward after President Trump attacked him over his book. That's funny because journalists themselves have been saying far worse things about Woodward for more than a decade. Woodward's new book isn't out yet, but has already created a frenzy of news coverage about Trump's dysfunctional White House. Naturally, Trump lashed out in a series of tweets attacking Woodward's credibility. We haven't read the book and can't vouch for its accuracy. Neither have reporters broadcasting its most sensational findings. Well, actually, we can vouch that they're not accurate according to the number of people who you just saw. Still, you can see why reporters would want to protect one of their own from the vile attacks waged against their hero. Why, just look at the vitriol that is spewed forth from his critics. Now, let's take a look at some of the quotes that come out of actual mainstream, quote-unquote, we know what the progressive status news outlets. The latest in a long string, this is in the past what they've said about Woodward's writings, the latest in a long string of questionable journalistic episodes. It reveals a grotesquely swollen ego fed by 40 years of hero worship. Bob Woodward's plunged into sheer hackery. Next. Why does Bob Woodward get to lie and still be Bob Woodward? As an analyst, Woodward is a particular kind of awful. He's the dumb blonde of American journalism. Next. Woodward, despite filing one dubious story after another, retains his position as an eminence grace of D.C. reporters. It is relentlessly biased against the president, illuminates his role as an establishment cipher. Wow, a threat to First Amendment freedoms if there ever was one, right? Just one problem. Every one of those quotes, every single one was penned by prominent mainstream so-called journalists. Arianna Huffington, founder of Pulitzer Prize-winning Huffington Post, is one who called Woodward a dumb blonde. There are many more attacks where those came from. In fact, the mainstream press has been on something of a campaign to tear down Woodward's credibility for years. During the Bush and Obama administrations, Woodward bashing articles ran in Newsweek, New York Magazine, the Huffington Post, the New Republic, and many others, with headlines like, Bob Woodward's credibility finally hits the ocean floor. The myth of Bob Woodward. Why is this man an American icon? What the hell happened to Bob Woodward? Woodward as journalistic hero, the real state of denial, the long, long fall of Bob Woodward, the troubling things I learned when I re-reported Bob Woodward's book on John Belushi. Why the brutal attacks from journalists on one of their own, and the Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter who brought down Nixon and inspired legions to become journalists, no less? Well, back in the early 2000s, Woodward committed the cardinal journalistic sin of writing a couple books that were more or less sympathetic toward the Bush administration. He later wrote books bashing the administration, but that wasn't enough to redeem himself. Then during the Obama years, Woodward doubled down on his sinful ways by daring to criticize President Obama, challenging the truthfulness of some of Obama's claims, and once suggesting that an Obama administration official tried to intimidate him. If there's one thing you can't do to be a journalist in good standing, it's write anything that makes a Republican look good, or that makes a Democrat, especially Obama, look bad. Even if the reporting is solid and the reporter's Bob Woodward, it doesn't matter. The message to journalists everywhere is clear. No one, not even Woodward, can stray from journalism's liberal dogma and keep their reputations intact. But now Woodward has written a book that makes Trump look even worse than the Washington establishment had suspected. So all his past sins are forgiven. His reporting is impeccable, his facts unassailable. Any challenges to Woodward or his craft are deeply offensive, at least for now. After all, Woodward might someday churn out a subsequent book that is critical of a future Democrat. Then he'll once again be a disgrace to journalists everywhere. The book is a joke, like Omarosa's book, like this guy Michael Wolff's book. It's the latest thing the media can cling on to attack the President of the United States. The anonymous op-ed is a joke. It's pathetic. It is a disgruntled individual within the White House, perhaps, maybe somewhere else. Who the hell knows? But the New York Times, like the rest of the media, have it out for this president, and it is abundantly apparent to anybody with 2 eyes and 2 ears. And then, of course, all but ignored is what's taking place in the Senate Judiciary Committee, where you actually have a gaggle of clowns called Democrats, led by Cory Booker, who are disgracing themselves and disgracing the process as the nation tries to watch and decide on an individual who will be perhaps confirmed for life to serve on the United States Supreme Court. It is a sorry state of affairs we have in this country. A lot of it is due to the media, of course the left, of course the Democrats. That's it.